Eagles. I've received several emails asking me for another argumentative essay review lesson plan. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've created this presentation, and it's very similar to the argumentative essay how-to lesson that we had earlier. In fact, some of the slides are just me repeating the main points. But I had some students tell me, look, you went through an argumentative essay with us, and you actually showed us a sample response of the argumentative essay. Will you please do another one of those? It was very helpful. So what I've done is I've created another presentation on writing the argumentative essay, where I will take you step by step through the process of writing your argumentative essay for your AP test. So I'm going to go through a different question that you guys haven't seen yet. And again, you could get an argumentative essay question on anything from the curriculum. So I thought I'd take the time right now to go over an additional argumentative essay question and review the main, step-by-step process of writing the argumentative essay. So today's presentation is going to be a review of the argumentative essay, the step-by-step process, and we will go through a sample question and response. Okay, so today we're going to do practice question, and I'm going to set the guidelines of how I'd like your argumentative essay to be formatted. Now, how long does it need to be? Yes, I do set a minimum. We're going with a 4-paragraph minimum. Some teachers teach their students to do 5. I have found that 4 paragraphs is perfect. So we're going to go with a 4-paragraph minimum to write our argumentative essay. Each one of the 4 paragraphs is going to have its own unique characteristics of what you're supposed to write. Okay, so let's go through them. Paragraph 1 is going to be your thesis statement. Now, I got to be honest with you guys. The thesis statement is the key to the whole argumentative essay. If you don't have a solid thesis statement, then you're going to struggle scoring the points on the rubric. So yes, the thesis statement is the most important thing you can do on your argumentative essay. Yes, I want you to score all the evidence and reasoning points, but you've got to have the thesis statement down. So I'm going to go over exactly what I would like it to look like regarding your thesis statement. So paragraph 1, thesis statement. You need to pick a side and then establish your claim. And when I say pick a side, you guys, I don't want you to be bashful about it. Jump right in and pick a side, be very forceful, say, hey, I'm going with this and this is why. Don't say, well, it may be this or maybe that. No, jump in the pool. Don't dip your toe in the pool. Jump all the way in the pool, baby. You want to pick a side, be solid on the side you pick, and then establish your claim. All right, that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, very simple. Evidence and reasoning. What does evidence mean? It means connecting your claim to a foundational document. So this is what I would like your paragraph to look like. You'll first explain your foundational document. Then you'll relate it to your thesis, and then give a reason why it relates to your thesis. So each paragraph, or paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, they're going to have 3 parts. Explain the document, relate it to your thesis, and then give the reason why it relates to your thesis. Okay, so paragraph 2 is your first piece of evidence. Paragraph 3 is going to be your second piece of evidence. All you do is explain your second foundational document, relate it to your thesis, and then give a reason why it relates to your thesis. Okay? So paragraph 1, thesis statement. Paragraph 2, evidence and reasoning. Paragraph 3, evidence and reasoning. And then we conclude with the rebuttal point, paragraph 4. So on your argumentative essay, you're going to be asked to recognize the opposing side, right? So whatever side you pick, in your 4th paragraph, you're going to have to say, well, the other side of the argument says this, but then you have to refute it, and you have to say why your side is better. So paragraph 4 is rebuttal and refute. You recognize the counter argument, and then you say why yours is better. Give the opposing view of the argument and refute it, right? Okay, so 4-paragraph minimum, that's the format I'd like to see with your argumentative essay. Okay, now, Again, this is not your question that you're going to have when you get done with this presentation, but it is an example question. So based off of what you guys have emailed me, you would like another example of how to write it. So here we go. In an effort to balance free speech with the need to create safe learning environments for a diverse group of students, some public universities have established free speech zones on their campuses. Within the zones, students are permitted to protest, post signs, and engage freely in the expression of their opinions. Outside the zones, however, students are expected to avoid speech that could be seen as offensive and obscene. Many have criticized these zones for limiting free speech and have called into question the constitutionality of designated zones for free speech. Okay, so this is a free speech question. We got this. Develop an argument either for or against the use of free speech zones on public college campuses. All right, so you've given this little prompt, we have been given this prompt where you have these free speech zones. Are they good? Are they constitutional? You're going to go for or against, right? Now, here's the rest of the question. Use at least one piece of evidence from one of the following foundational documents. First Amendment, Declaration of Independence. And again, you know, the Declaration of Independence is a good one. I like that one. But those are your two. You must use one of those two. You can use them both, or you can just use one, right? Okay, respond to the prompt with a defensible claim or thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. Support your claim with at least two pieces of specific and relevant evidence. One piece of evidence must come from one of the following documents listed above, foundational documents. A second piece of evidence can come from any other foundational document not used as your first piece of evidence, or it may be from your knowledge of course concepts. Okay, so there's your question. We could pick for or against this. I think I could make an argument for both sides, but let's go ahead and do against. Okay, let's say that we don't like these free speech zones that are set up on public college campuses. We're going to feel that they're infringing upon our free speech rights. Okay, so we're going with against the free speech zones. We have picked our side. We're going against, and our claim is that they limit free speech. Okay, so remember, pick a side and establish your claim. Use the word because in your thesis. Make sure you use because, and it's always good to restate the prompt in your thesis. Okay, we're going to use the First Amendment. That'll be our evidence. We'll talk about how the First Amendment protects free speech and assembly. And our reasoning point is going to be it shouldn't be restricted to help others feel comfortable. Okay, so when you create your outline, again, you're not creating your whole argument. You're just creating your main points. So you're going to use First Amendment as your evidence. You'll explain how it protects free speech and assembly. And our reasoning point is going to surround the idea that our speech shouldn't be restricted just because we don't want others to feel more comfortable, right? In this example, we will use both documents listed. So we'll use the Declaration of Independence as our second piece of evidence. We'll explain what the Declaration of Independence is, and then we will talk about how the Declaration of Independence itself is an act of free speech, right? And our reasoning behind it is going to be majority shouldn't control opinion. Okay, so that's our outline. Now we got to articulate our main points in the format of an argumentative essay. Now I can't stress this enough. The most important part of the argumentative essay is your thesis statement. If you fumble the thesis statement, then you're not going to score the points on the rubric. So you got to make sure you get this down, okay? Thesis statement, pick a side and establish your claim. Use the language of the prompt. You need to parrot the question, right? And that's just, hopefully you guys just know that by now. Choose a side, must be one of the options presented in the prompt. Eagles, don't be bashful. Pick a side, a firm, it is this because of this. Don't say, well, I think it might be this, but no, it is this because of this. Be very firm with the side you pick, right? You must use the word because. When I grade your argumentative essay, if the word because isn't in there, I'm not giving points. And I don't mean to be a jerk about that. It's just when people don't use the word because, they don't take a side and establish a claim. You pick a side, you say because, and then you establish your claim. Okay, so we're gonna write a thesis for our sample question, right? Develop an argument either for or against the use of free speech zones on public college campuses. Here's some example theses. Well, anyway, there should not be free speech zones because this can lead to limitations of free speech being imposed in other areas of campus. All right, so we went against it, right? We are very firm. There should not be free speech zones because this can lead to limitations of free speech being imposed in other areas of campus. Now, I just thought I'd throw in a thesis statement if you picked the opposing side, just to be fair. Free speech zones should be permitted because these zones place reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on First Amendment rights. So if you wanted to argue the other side, the time, place, and manner restriction, that would be a great argument as well. But remember, we were going to go with there should not be free speech zones. We'll write this argumentative essay with that top thesis. Oh, I just want to point out the clear and present danger limits. Speech is not absolute. But anyway, let's go back to the one we're going to use. So we've picked our side. There should not be free speech zones because, right, limitations of free speech. So we picked our side and we've established our claim. That's our thesis statement. Now, conclude your first paragraph by identifying the foundational documents you will be using to defend your claim, right? For example, the evidence to back up my claim can be found in the Articles of Confederation and Constitution, right? Well, we picked First Amendment and Declaration of Independence, but it's just an example. When you write your thesis, wrap it up by identifying the documents that you're going to use in your argumentative essay. Now we're going to make writing paragraph 2 and 3 as simple as we can. We're going to have a checklist, right? When we write paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, because they're basically the same, keep a couple things in mind. You got to have evidence and you got to have reasoning to back it up. So our checklist will be very simple, 3 parts to the checklist. Number 1, when you start your second paragraph, you just explain the first foundational document. Just explain what it is. It's part of the evidence point. The next thing you do is you relate that foundational document to your thesis statement. So explain the document and how it relates to your thesis. But you're not done. You have to close the loop, and this is where the reasoning point comes in. You have to give a reason why it relates to your thesis. So when you write paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, first explain the document, relate it to your thesis, and then give a reason why it relates to your thesis. All right, a couple helpful hints. First one, I've had students ask me, hey, how do I start this? I know what to say, but I can't start my writing. You don't have to do this, but it can be helpful to begin with as demonstrated in, as evidence in, as expressed in, and then name the document, right? So if you're going to use Declaration of Independence for one of your pieces of evidence, you would say, as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, blah, 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 and then you can go. So sometimes it helps getting started with, starting it like that, but you don't have to. Helpful hint number 2, using words such as thus, therefore, and as a result can help attach evidence to reasoning. Whenever I grade one of these, students, when they struggle scoring on the rubric, they struggle with the reasoning point, and they don't quite know how to close the loop. So when you give your point, like how this foundational document relates to your thesis, you got to close the loop. And a lot of times, starting it with therefore or as a result or thus, it can help connect that evidence to reasoning. So whenever you can use those types of phrases or words, it will be helpful with you scoring the reasoning point. Okay, but I don't want to get off topic here. Point is, for paragraph 2, we want to stick to our checklist and do these 3 things. Explain the first foundational document, relate it to the thesis, give a reason why it relates to the thesis. Let's do a sample response. Here we go. Now remember, when we write this, we want three parts, right? We want to explain the document, we want to relate it to the thesis, and give the reason why it relates to the thesis. So, did we explain the document? Yes, we did, right there. As expressed within the First Amendment of the Constitution, free speech is a fundamental right and a cornerstone for our civil liberties. Okay, so we talk about First Amendment and how it protects free speech as a civil liberty, right? So we've explained our first foundational document. Now relate it to the thesis. Clearly, the framers intended the right of free speech and assembly to have priority as it was added to the Constitution within the First Amendment. So the argument we're saying here is that free speech is critical because it was in the First Amendment. It was added first, so it's clearly a priority. So we've explained our document, we've related it to our thesis, but we have not scored the point yet. Eagles, you have to close the loop. You have to give the reasoning point or explain why it relates to your thesis. This is where most students struggle, but you guys are going to do great. Let's look at an example of why it relates to the thesis. Placing limits on speech to make others feel more comfortable is not a good enough reason to limit a constitutional right. Thus, these free speech zones hinder freedom rather than promote it. Okay, so that's a good way to close the loop. We're basically saying Constitution is more critical than making other people feel comfortable, right? So that is our way we close the loop in paragraph 2. So we've, again, described the document, relate it to the thesis, and then close the loop by explaining why it relates to the thesis. And then, of course, we tied it up here with to limit free speech is to limit a foundational principle of freedom. Okay, now paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 is essentially a carbon copy of paragraph 2. Evidence and reasoning, checklist is the same. Explain your second foundational document, relate it to your thesis, and give a reason why it relates to your thesis. But you'll notice I put this little thing right here. It can be a SCOTUS case. That means Supreme Court of the United States case. And there have been many argumentative essays that have been presented to me by the College Board that really work with a Supreme Court case, right? So, I mean, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there has been times where, this really relates well to Citizens United, or it relates well to Gideon Wainwright. I'd rather use that for my second piece of evidence, and you can do that. However, most of the time, you will just end up picking a second foundational document. But keep this in your back pocket. It can be an ace up your sleeve in case you need it. But essentially, we're going to use a second foundational document as our evidence. And again, start it with as demonstrated in, or as evidence in, or as expressed in, if you need help starting your next paragraph. And using words such as thus, therefore, and as a result within the body of the paragraph can help you connect your evidence to your reasoning. Okay, let's do a paragraph 3. Okay, first part, we got to explain our foundational document, right? There it is. The Declaration of Independence identifies why the United States should break away from England. We're just describing what the document is. Okay, now why does it relate to our thesis? Free speech zones violate the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, which itself was an exercise of free speech against an expansive, tyrannical government. Each person should be able to express their opinion free of punishment. Again, we talked about the Declaration of Independence, and it's this. The spirit of the Declaration of Independence was free speech itself. So therefore, we've related it back to our thesis. Have we scored the point? No, we have not, because we have to say why. We have to close the loop. So the next part, free speech zones tread dangerously into territory where the majority has the power to shut down opinions it does not agree with at the expense of the rights of the individual, and thus the spirit of the Declaration of Independence would be hindered. Now, all these points that we're making in these paragraphs, we scribbled those down on our outline. So the outline is important. When you first read the question, make sure you write down which, what's your thesis points you're going to make, and then identify your documents, and then make sure you give evidence and reasoning, right? So we're just kind of articulating our outline that we started at the finish, or that we wrote down at the start. Sorry, that we wrote down at the start. And then we're just articulating it in the paragraphs. Okay, this is paragraph 3. Let's move on to paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 is the concluding paragraph. You recognize the opposing viewpoint and you refute it. So you got to recognize the other side, but you got to say why it's not, why it's, yeah, this is the opposing side, but it still sucks compared to my argument. So you got to refute it. Okay, and then if you have time, wrap it up nice and neat, make it look good, restate your argument established in your thesis. And if you have any remaining points that maybe you didn't bring up that are relevant, absolutely add it. Eagles, you are not marked wrong. You only are given points. Points aren't taken away. So the way the rubric works is the grader will read it, and you will only score points. They won't say -1, -2. No, it's none of that. So if you have other things to say, this is a great place to say it in your concluding paragraph. If I was taking the AP test and I still had 10 minutes left to write, then I would bulk up my 4th paragraph with whatever I could think of, because again, you're not points aren't deducted, they're only added. But don't let me take away the main point of the paragraph 4. You've got to recognize the opposing viewpoint and refute it. So let's do that in an example.
All right, now let's go through paragraph 4, where we recognize the opposing viewpoint of the argument, and then we're going to refute it. Okay, so paragraph 4 is the rebuttal point. You have to be able to at least recognize your opponent's or the other side of the argument. But I don't want you to just recognize it. I want you to also refute it. Okay, and then after you've established that rebuttal point, this is a great opportunity in paragraph 4 to conclude everything, to tie everything up in a big, nice bow, and present your argumentative essay. So first, we need to recognize the opposing viewpoint. Okay? Now, in this particular argumentative essay, we write, some may argue that allowing free speech zones on college campuses is appropriate because these zones place reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions of the First Amendment rights. So we talked about time, place, and manner with regard to free speech. So that in that sentence, we have recognized the opposing viewpoint where free speech zones are a good thing. But I want you guys to make sure you refute this. So then we move to the refute part of it. However, this argument is not sufficient because these free speech zones would set a dangerous precedent that would lead to suppression of speech in other areas of the college campus. So again, we recognize the other point of view, but we refuted it, and you'll notice that I tied this back into our original thesis. The free speech zones we're saying is violating free speech, and we're saying that, yeah, we get it. Creating these zones is reasonable because of time, place, and manner restrictions that have been established. However, if you do this, it's going to bleed to the other areas of the campus. It sets a dangerous precedent, right, in our argument. So we've recognized the opposing viewpoint. However, we have refuted it. So there we've scored that point on the rubric. Now, this is where you could essentially create a paragraph 5 if you want to. And if you have time, maybe you do that. If you're taking your AP test and you're writing your argumentative essay and you have time, you may want to break right here and create paragraph 5 and really conclude. However, you don't need to. So we've included our conclusion for this within this paragraph 4. So, in conclusion, free speech zones clearly violate free speech within the First Amendment and the spirit of consent of the governed as declared in the Declaration of Independence. So notice how we've tied in our original evidence with our conclusion. Now this is where you can really tie everything up and close the loop, Eagles. If you have something else to say or a final point that you want to make, this is your opportunity to really let it go and say any remaining points. Now, I'm just going to simply give one final sentence, but you can really extend this if you want. You almost want to argue in a way where you would argue with your buddies or something somewhere. Take let yourself go and make a solid argument here. So for this, I've tied it up with this sentence. Furthermore, free speech is an essential part of civil debate and promotes better government discussion by engaging in the marketplace of ideas. Okay, so I make another point here where, dude, free speech is key. If you can't freely debate, have a civil debate with somebody else, how can you understand everybody's point of view, right? So having this free speech as a civil debate, it's going to promote better government discussion, and now everybody can engage in the marketplace of ideas, and thus you can come up with better solutions to a problem, right? So this is our argument. This is how we would close it off. Now again, we could have picked either side of this particular argumentative essay question. We just went with the one side, but you could have clearly argued the other side very well. But here's your concluding paragraph 4 for your argumentative essay. You've recognized the opposing side, you have clearly refuted it, and then you've restated your main points, and anything left over, any points you want to make, this is where you do it in paragraph 4.
Now, Eagles, I've had a couple emails from you guys saying that you're concerned about this. What if I choke? Eagles, that's Titan business there. We don't choke. We rise above and soar. So we're going to have our emergency plan in place. If you get into the argumentative essay and you're reading it going, I have no idea what the heck to write. This sucks. I'm going to fail. This has been worthless. I've wasted my time. Don't go there. Just relax. If you get in trouble, deep breath and go, you know what? I'm just going to throw out the Declaration of Independence, consent of the governed. You can take almost any prompt and talk about the importance of the will of the people as it's, declared in the Declaration of Independence, right? Consent of the governed, the people are in charge, the Declaration of Independence. If you want to use the phrase popular sovereignty, that's a good one. I know sometimes I can never remember how to spell sovereignty, but if you get in a jam, just grab the Declaration of Independence, talk about the people need to be in charge, throw in the words popular sovereignty in there, it sounds cool, and quote consent of the governed, and you'll be fine. That's just one emergency plan. Let's do a second one. Emergency plan number 2. If you get in there and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say, and this Declaration of Independence thing that Brody was talking about is not helpful. Well, Federalist Papers number 51 is the other backup plan. Federalist Papers 51 is about checks and balances and separation of powers. Okay, our government's established on this, and pretty much everything falls into this, idea that we have these branches of government and federalism, where everything's set up so that we can check each other, and there's a separation of power. So if you get into your argumentative essay and you're a little confused on what to write, you can always fall back on Declaration of Independence, popular sovereignty, right? Or you can fall back on Federalist Papers 51. You can start talking about checks and balances and separation of powers. And then use words like limited government in there. They always like that kind of stuff. So Federalist Papers number 51 is our second backup plan. Now we're going to have a third backup plan, and that's our Supreme Court cases. So again, I haven't talked to you guys about this much because I didn't want you to rely on it. But as a third backup plan, if you can't think of how any of the 9 foundational documents relates to the argument, but you can think of how a Supreme Court case relates to the argument, you can use that. You can. Now, it's got to be the second piece of evidence, not the first, because remember, your first has to be from the list they provide you. But a second piece of evidence doesn't necessarily have to be one of the 9 foundational documents. I know I haven't said that to you guys very much. It could be a Supreme Court case. So, emergency plan. consent to the governed argument, try to just swing it in there, or checks and balances argument from Fed 51, or reference one of your 15 Supreme Court cases as your second piece of evidence. Okay, that's our emergency plan.